Hi, I'm Charlie Harp, and this is the Informonster Podcast. Today, on the Informonster Podcast, I am joined by Michael Klotz of Velox Health Metadata. Michael and his company are looking to help make it easier and more seamless for payers to connect to the data that helps improve their clinical data operations. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Charlie.
So one of the things I thought we would start off with is, if you don't mind, sharing a little bit about your background and your journey, the journey that brought you to where you are today in healthcare.
Sure. Yeah. So I got into healthcare almost by happenstance or by coincidence, about 2008, 2007, 2008. I grew up in Austria in the Alps, and I got educated as an electrical engineer, and then I went to USC in LA to get a business degree, and sort of got stuck like many people do. Turns out the US sort of fit me really well, and I think it still does. And after getting that degree, I started a pretty typical consulting career implementing ERP systems, specifically JD Edwards and Oracle. And then the .com era came around, and so I got involved into integrating front-end e-commerce systems and back-end business systems, which led me to middleware and Microsoft. So I was a Microsoft partner. I had my first business was a services business as a Microsoft Gold partner. I sold that in 2008. And what happened along the way, I had a client starting in 2007, which happened to be in the medical records collection abstraction business, which at the time was really weird to me and didn't make much sense. And there was a little disbelief on why would people do things that way and all that. But that was really my introduction to the world of healthcare IT, the world of payers, the world of HEDIS, the world of risk adjustment along the way. What came out of that was that client happened to go bankrupt and end up owing my company a bunch of money. But I owned the IP we built for them. So there, I got to start my first business around that IP, which became Health Data Vision. So we raised a Series A and built what I think was at the time a pretty well advanced sort of workflow platform with as much automation as you could possibly have, trying to streamline and improve on that medical records collection abstraction workflow, if you will, that we then had a bunch of payer clients. So that's how I got into healthcare.
So the whole notion of trying to sift useful information out of the byproduct of data that we produce in healthcare is not a new thing for you.
No, definitely not. And yet all along, I have been wondering, why are we doing things that way and how could we do it better?
All right. And that brings us to Velox. How about Velox's origin story?
Yeah, so it kind of goes right back to back, even though there's probably 10 years from where I just left off. What I always thought about was, why are we not using structured data for this? And realized pretty quickly there were not really any standards or any intentions or any sort of organized efforts around that. But all along I had this desire to do something differently, and I thought also in the long term, I'd rather cannibalize my own business than have somebody else do it to me. Of course, I didn't fully realize just how slow things move in healthcare, but even so, I still am, foolishly believing in how we think we can and should make things better. So within that time frame, we saw Cures Act pass, which to me was sort of a milestone because it was a pretty big signal that other people were thinking about that, and there might even be sort of a useful framework around that, both from a regulatory perspective. And the FHIR was emerging, and it was pretty obvious at that point, I think, that FHIR could be that standard that eventually brings the parties together and makes this much more palatable and much more real time and all the other things we're talking about every day today. So with Cures and FHIR sort of, for us being foregone conclusions even before the rules really dropped in 2020, which I think was another big milestone because I think there were really meaningful rules and still are. We had this idea that, it's not just about having a standard for the data, but also that FHIR obviously includes the whole concept of APIs. But we also thought about, well, how does the internet work, right? The internet basically works with this thing called DNS, and most people only know it when it doesn't work. But it dynamically and sort of seamlessly makes you get to the right source and grab data in a way that your browser understands. And so we thought, well, that's kind of the metaphor, the model we should really pursue to make clinical data flow directly and seamlessly and dynamically. Not to ignore security and the other considerations, of course. So we had this idea of where we wanted to end up, and sort of the foregone conclusion is we're not there yet, and we kind of know that. We know we're not at dynamic yet. We're going to be in 2-3 years out. But we built a prototype and we started working on a patent towards that. But we also knew that that's not where we could start as a company, as a revenue producing viable business entity. We would need to start somewhere where A, the customer gets it, and B, where we can add instant value. And so that's where we came up with what we're in market with today, which is called the payer enablement platform.
And a lot of it, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting or misstating this, it's a lot of it is the payers want to get access to good clinical data to supplement what they're doing. And the real question is the juice worth the squeeze? When you look at the data that's available, how much, and I'm probably totally oversimplifying it, but to me, a lot of it seems like what's available, how much work is it to get it, how easy is it going to be to onboard it, and then what we're talking about with the PIQXL Gateway and Picky is, how clean is the data? What's the quality of the data once you onboard it?
Right.
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think there's another dimension to this, and we've talked about this before, which we call the completeness sort of dimension, which is, while I think payers typically go, oh, I get this data from this network, participant, or I get data from an HIE, and I get a good number of members' data from that. Nobody knows if it really covers all what we call clinical events, so encounters and labs and things like that, for a given member. And if you have all your members covered, right, you get more is better these days, but nobody knows what 100% is. So we got more, but are we at 70? Are we at 75? Usually we don't know. And so that's also what we're looking to solve for, is define completeness and then attempt to reach completeness. It's certainly within the context of what's complete and useful for the given use cases we're trying to service, right?
Okay. Now, for folks that aren't familiar with the payer market, is the reason the payers want the clinical data, is it purely value-based care? Is it about improving their ability to understand what's going on from the perspective of HEDIS? In a nutshell, what is the reason why payers care about the clinical data on their members?
Well, it's all of the above. So there's a number of use cases. I think we're currently tracking more than 10. Some of them are most, purely, or not just purely, but in part compliance driven, right? You need to do your risk adjustment and you need to have your evidence. You have to report HEDIS, rates, and therefore you need to have the clinical data, at least for certain measures, to substantiate that, or to even come up with denominators and numerators for those measures. But a big part of it is also, how do you run a profitable, viable business, and how do you service your members well within that, which, not that they're mutually exclusive, of course.
So doing like care management, case management type things to
help
improve
all the way to fraud, waste, abuse.
Yeah.
Prior auth is now a hot topic, of course, and others, right? So care coordination, care management, population health, depending on how you slice and dice it, basically. Member outreach, provider outreach. So a lot of things sort of go in there. I think gap closure is a big one in the context of the quality use cases, besides the reporting, right?
Sure. So in the stark, bleak world before Velox, how do payers find the data now?
Well, effectively, I think, everybody starts with their network, I would say, right? They know who their in-network providers or groups are. And they may have data feeds. So if you look at HEDIS, typically everybody talks about supplemental data feeds, and for the most part, those are custom files, custom flat files, right? So that's usually where you get sort of your majority of data today. Not to speak to completeness of that data. And then you add to that with other things. Some clinical information actually comes from claims, right? But medical records review collection is still a big thing. And obviously that's expensive and painful and doesn't always yield what you're looking to get. So oftentimes, you need to engage vendors, you need to pay a lot per record, and then there's a manual process or NLP or something involved to actually, what I call, reintroduce structure into unstructured data that used to be structured if you just go back far enough to the source, right?
Well, I think it's interesting because the other thing too is, and we've been working in the payer market for a while, and I hear people talk about data acquisition, and the cool thing about what you guys are doing is, it's one thing to know where to go to get the data, but for anybody that's onboarding data, it's a slog. Even the best data takes effort to onboard. And one of the things that I think is extremely cool, not kind of cool, but extremely cool about what you guys are doing is it's giving you insight, not just into there's data here and here's how they deliver it, but it kind of gives you an idea of how easy it is as a consumer of data. How easy is it going to be to get the data? How much work is going to have to go into getting it? And the really cool thing about that is, once you guys are ubiquitous, that's going to affect how people produce data, because their goal is to make their data look as easy to consume as the next guy's data. And right now, all of that is cloaked in mystery. Right.
And it's going to be a lot easier if you all, move towards a standard and move towards, an infrastructure where, we use the same standards and we are much more real time, and where, like you say, we can actually benchmark the sources and say, hey, you're still on US CDI 3 or not even that, when, other sources at 5. And again, there's a lot of potential there to not just do it through regulation, but through market forces, right? I mean, I don't know how many people know this, but, typical payers have agreements with their in-network providers that they have to provide clinical or medical records for free or for a very reasonable fee. And yet that is laborious. It's very what they call abrasive, right? So abrasion is a big word still. Yeah. And at the same time, we could leverage APIs they had to stand up already for patient access, and improve on that tremendously. So it can be a total win-win. And it can be incented through those, what we would call updated provider contracting, and on and on and on. So in value-based, now there's there's data should be shared both ways, and we've seen some success stories, around that as well. So I think it could be a total win-win. But yes, to your point, when we have standard ways of measuring and inventorying, capturing what we are focused on, the metadata around these endpoints and the quality of the data coming from you, then, it's almost like, I forget which Malcolm Gladwell book it was, but where he had this thought experiment where, if enough people tattoo their IQ on their forehead, then everybody else will do it too, right?
Yeah.
So
social pressure, absolutely.
Exactly, in that spirit, right?
So contrasted to the way it is now, if for somebody who's leveraging the Velox platform, how would you characterize the value or the speed to value of the approach you guys are taking at identifying this? Because I also want to point out that you're not, and I could be wrong, you tell me, but you're not just saying, here's a source and it's FHIR, but you're actually doing your own analytics on what's going on with that source, and you have an algorithm that scores the completeness and the usability of the data. And I'm probably characterizing it terribly, but the value of that, I would imagine, is a real accelerant for people who want to take advantage of clinical data.
Absolutely. No, yeah, I think your characterization is good. it's obviously a journey. We're at the pretty rudimentary stages of that, but that's exactly what we're doing. And what we're doing even before that is we inventory score and basically on a standardized scale benchmark existing data operations of the plan, right? So we can tell them within hours or within minutes of them uploading data, metadata, which is not a whole lot of work, exactly how they score, both internally and externally, against best practices internally and against their peers, and this concept of completeness externally. So we do what we call we analyze the data channels they have, and then we farm from the ecosystem the opportunities they have to improve on that, right? And yes, all that is on a standardized scale with a standardized framework. So it's meaningful scoring along all the dimensions that matter around clinical data, and it's benchmarkable, and it applies across existing and future data channels, which the future ones we call opportunities. So those are all possible data sources and ways of getting data that we know about that they're currently not yet using, that are relevant to that plan, right?
I would imagine that'd be pretty valuable to get that kind of information. Do you think, I find this in the work that we do at Clinical Architecture, that sometimes I almost have to get through kind of a denial where it's an educational process for people to get to the point where they understand and see the value in what we're trying to do, whether it's data quality or semantic normalization or whatever. Do you kind of see the same thing? Do you feel like most payers get it? They're just waiting for a product like yours to be available? Or do you think there's going to be an education process where they're going to have to either see or experience it to really wrap their head around it?
That there's definitely a process to that. So we think we're creating a new category, and that's the burden you take on, right? Yeah. It's as cool as it is, or as powerful as it is, it's not obvious on first sight, I will say, right? The things we do are typically not very sexy, but the results we produce should be and can be and will be, right? But yeah, no, we're absolutely in evangelizing mode, if you want to use a Microsoft term, right? And we know we'll be in that evangelizing mode for quite a while. But what we're doing over time, we're onboarding more and more payers, and we have quite a few plans on the platform now. We're starting to farm some of those KPIs and really start pushing out some analytics where people, even if they're not yet on the platform, they go, oh, I can relate to that number. I can relate to that statistic. I kind of know where I would be, or I think I'm behind. I better get on this, right? So, we believe that 5 years from now, vocabulary like channels and opportunities will be ubiquitous. That's clearly our goal, right? But when I talk about channels and opportunities right now, people go like, what are you talking about, right? Yeah. And
you're creating a vocabulary.
That's the journey we're on, right? But I have to say we're making progress. We have many successes along the way, and I think the indication is that we're doing something really useful and something that is actually catching up.
Well, I think it's as somebody who's been evangelizing in my space for, I think, coming up on my 18th year here at Clinical Architecture. It's gratifying when people start to, when the light bulb goes on, and it's almost like, okay, so I wasn't crazy. This is a real thing. And I think about, you and I met kind of at the beginning of the Picky journey, with the PIQXL Gateway.
Yep.
And I remember us sitting around. Was it HIMSS in Orlando?
Yes.
When
a
we
very
had
noisy,
that first
big
conversation.
lunch area, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And it just kind of, the stars kind of aligned, what you were doing and what we're doing. I think that it is kind of Will likes to say it, so we can make fun of Will a little bit, but the idea of being better together, I think what you guys are doing is great. And obviously I believe strongly in what we're doing. And I think that, the combination of the two, I think it's good for what you guys are doing, but it's also good for us to see a practical application of the Picky framework in a way where it adds into a picture of insight around how we can leverage information and make use of it, and also maybe create some of that social pressure, because if you care about something, you measure it and then you can improve upon it.
Yep.
So, I'm very excited about the potential for us to collaborate on this. And I think there's a lot of benefit, because I think, one of the things I feel in getting to know you over the last year or so is that you're another one of those people who's very passionate. It's not just about, doing business and revenue. It's about the bigger picture. We can do more than we've done. We can be better than we are. And I just think it's great when you encounter somebody who resonates with you on that level. So I've really appreciated the time.
Yeah, no, same here. And, I, sometimes say there's probably easier ways to make money, but, unfortunately that's my bone, and I'm the dog kind of thing. Right.
Yeah.
So
I'm with you.
yeah.
So before we wrap up, I want to talk about the elephant in the room. I want to talk about the green donut. Now, as the inventor of the Informonster, which my marketing team gave me a lot of grief when I first came up with the Informonster. So what's the origin of the green donut? And I love the green donut mascot on your website.
Yeah, marketing totally ran with that. They sort of grabbed it from me, and I'm glad they did. So, if anybody's ever seen our main dashboard for payers, there's one KPI specifically, which is a donut infograph, which shows basically the mix of data channels or data channels and opportunities color coded. So from all the way to red, which is custom, which is the worst, to various colors along the way, to green being FHIR in real time version 4.x or higher, which is obviously the best. So we had this conversation, I think, internally, where it probably was Will saying, so in one sentence, tell me what am I supposed to do with this platform, right? And I said, it's very simple. Your job is to make the donut green. And I didn't, that was just sort of like, how I thought about it, right? But clearly that's what's supposed to happen, right? You move towards, all FHIR-based, standards-based, real-time structured clinical data. And so they kind of went like, oh, green donut, great. Like, let's do something with that, right? And that's where the green donut was born. I'll say this, and, I may get some grief for that, but I didn't like the sprinkles, but I kind of got used to them. Because, of course, I'm an engineer by training. So to me, it should have looked a lot more like a 3-dimensional infograph and not like a donut you can eat. But, I love the guy. What can I say, right? So there it is.
Well, I think it's brilliant. And I think it honestly, the Informonster was all, was my son kind of explaining to him, why do I exist? Because there's a lot of Informonsters out there that people create and it doesn't help them. It's chaos. So right. We're there to help them tame their Informonster. And, but I love the green. I wish I could steal the green donut for the PIQXL.
Well, you can borrow it,
Maybe I'll make an orange donut.
Hey, well, we can figure it out, I'm sure.
Michael, is there anything else that you'd like to share with the audience about Velox and the journey or anything?
Yeah, well, more than anything, I just want to encourage everybody to I think, share in our optimism, right? I think we're not completely delusional when we believe in a clinical data ecosystem that can be standardized and real time and secure, and where we know where we're going to get, and we can very quickly move to actually working on use cases, whether it be care or running a viable business, rather than fretting about silly things like why is this file not here, or why did they change this file again, and why are the code sets not like, or are they way off, stuff like that, right? We wouldn't be the first ones to figure out, and we can figure it out. So I think it's all about let's stick our heads together, let's focus on the things that work, and I think everybody, if they look hard enough, they will find why it's good for them too.
Well, and I resonate with that, because sometimes when I talk about picky, people say, Charlie, no one cares about the data they send out. And what's the point? They're not going to want to show it. They're not going to want to see what their score is because they don't care. And like you, I'm kind of an optimist, and I say, well, maybe it's not that they don't care. Maybe it's they don't know. We've been.
And I think then, you have to align the money with the desired outcome. And I think, again, in this ecosystem, there's a lot of room for that. I think it can be total win-win. And, the mechanism for achieving that is obviously the stuff we are talking about. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hey, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it, and excited about what we'll be able to accomplish together. Well, that's a wrap for us today on the Informonster Podcast. Thank you, Michael Klotz, for being here with us today. And thanks to all of you out there for listening in. And I'll see you all at the next episode of the Informonster Podcast.